Restaurants in 2020 have had to up their game, and all of the restaurants that remain open post-COVID will be the ones that pivoted their business, that looked at their business models and streamlined them, that leaned down their menus to the higher margin, low-cost items. And certainly we'll see that maintained into the future to ensure the profitability of restaurants, which they need to stay open and to reinvest in their businesses for the long haul.
This week on Dirty Linen, I want to talk about representation. Who speaks for hospitality? Who's having those conversations? And is there indeed an industry that is gathered that can be spoken for anyway? It's such a disparate industry. And it's been such a big year and there has been so much to talk about. One of the most prominent voices in the media and certainly behind the scenes has been Wes Lambert from the Restaurant Catering Industry Association. And I'm really happy to welcome Wes to the program. Hey, Wes, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Dani. Thank you.
It's been a bit of a year, hasn't it? And certainly you've been in the thick of a lot of the conversations that have been going on, public facing, but also behind the scenes. Tell us, how do you look back on 2020 from the middle of December where we find ourselves now?
Oh, well, 2020 is probably the most devastating year for hospitality, I would say, ever. But let's just say in a long time. I don't know of any highs. Certainly there were some highs and some openings of some amazing venues around the country and in Melbourne specifically, where it was one of the hardest years. But the lows are too numerous to count. We started with bushfires, which really opened the year in a negative way. And then we moved straight into the pandemic, which, it has been a series of highs and lows, with the lows being the peak of the pandemic and the second wave in a couple of states, and the highs being all of the anticipation around reopening and restrictions easing and getting to a COVID-safe summer or a COVID normal where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Melbourne, and Melbourne at the moment, I've been in the city every day for the past few days, and it's buzzing. Like, there is a lot of optimism around, and it feels great. We're so excited to be open again. We've certainly had the toughest ride of anywhere in Australia, but we know that a lot of businesses are still, tracking way below where they want to be. We also know that they're propped up by JobKeeper. How do you see things playing out? There's people can't get enough staff. We know that JobKeeper is going to finish. What do you think are the challenges for 2021, and how are things going to shake down?
Well, as you said, in Melbourne specifically, which has been open less than any other state, with outdoor parklets and now the indoor dining 1 per 2, it is certainly starting to get a bit busier, and the demand is definitely there to get out and eat. And it will be a great summer for Melbourne and for Victoria. But we're cautious on 2021. The demand, we think, is going to wane a little bit. There are no international visitors here. There are no international students. There's no working holiday makers. And we really don't expect them to begin to come back until at least the end of 2021. So it will be very important around the country that consumers continue to visit their favorite cafes, their favorite restaurants, continue to have the events, the weddings and the private events, and really the corporate functions, because in just a few days, the insolvency protections expire on 31 December, and then JobKeeper 2.0 goes down, Job Seeker goes down, and yes, JobMaker does come into play, but then we get to 30 March, and JobKeeper and Job Seeker are set to expire, and the Landlord Code of Practice. So certainly into the deep autumn and winter months, it will be vital that Australians continue to patronize businesses. Ultimately, prices have gone up, and we do expect that prices will stay up. Prices in hospitality needed a reset. The average price of a cup of coffee has been, between $3.60 and $4 for a decade. A steak has been around $25 to $28 for a decade. Certainly needs to be something that is continued in the future to be aligned with the increased costs of wages, the increased cost of rents, the increased cost of inputs of food and beverage, and then just the operating cost of businesses every day that have gone up over the decade.
Do you reckon that JobKeeper is going to end at the end of March, or do you think that the government will look at it and think we might need to run this a little bit longer?
Look, as of now, it's set to end at the end of March, and unemployment is certainly going down, and the economy is certainly getting stronger. I think that it will be difficult to see any downward trend from a Treasury's point of view as early as March. I think that there'll be lagging numbers. There will be demand till into February and then Valentine's Day in the hospitality sector, and we might not see that demand drop in terms that Treasury can notice. It may be a situation where bespoke stimulus is needed, similar to the out and about dining scheme in New South Wales, which is going to drive demand from mid-January until 30 June, bringing $1 billion to $1.5 billion into the arts and entertainment and the accommodation food service industry.
So it's more from that spending consumer side rather than from the, propping up the industry side.
Ultimately, every business will tell you that what they would prefer is to have their business back. They certainly enjoyed the JobKeeper if they were eligible, but as they got less than 30% down from year over year, then they are not eligible, and then they move on to the job maker for the people that they hire back into those positions.
And do you think that if a lot of people are saying that they think that when JobKeeper finishes, there will be a lot of businesses that, the writing that's been on the wall, is you finally have to read it and close the business. Do you think that the staff that are sort of shaken out into the market through those inevitable closures will balance things out and businesses will be able to staff up to a level that means that they can, open as much as they want to and get as much business as they want to?
Well, that is the $64 million question, is will there be enough staff in Australia, given that there's very few working holiday makers here and that there's no international students and that many of the skilled migrants that were here went back to their home countries. There certainly will be a shortage for some time, and it is important to understand that when some of the zombie businesses that are either trading well below previous year's revenue and are only propped up by stimulus, when they fall over in early 2021, that will provide some staff for other restaurants. But I think staffing issues are going to be with us for all of 2021, and it will be the year of training and apprenticeships and the year of micro-credentials and short courses.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting from a consumer point of view. I got an email from someone who reads my restaurant reviews today, and she spoke about, 5 different experiences that she'd had in her local neighborhood. And, there was this one Paragon restaurant that was doing everything right. But then the other 4 that she was talking about, they seemed really beset by issues, which, when I was sort of reading into it, it's like, it's all about staffing and it's all about inexperience. And it's, as much as we want people to support restaurants and to go to them, it's like there is obviously an impact of people employing less experienced people or perhaps less qualified people in certain roles, especially, customer facing for sure, but of course in kitchens as well. I mean, do you think that that's, something that puts the industry in greater peril?
Well, globally, hospitality runs usually in the top 5 industries. And in the US, it's a $900 billion industry just behind the government. And in many other countries, hospitality is seen not as just a job, but as a profession. And that's usually rewarded with reasonable wages and then tips that are commensurate with the service level that you get. And here in Australia, hospitality is not necessarily seen as a profession, which is something that restaurant and catering is definitely going to change in the future. But it is also that service level of tips that typically run between 5% and 8% in Australia that can affect that service level comparison between other countries and Australia. But the professionals that are still in the industry, they certainly want to get better. And any new entrants to the industry will learn and will become better skilled. But certainly consumers may have to understand in the short term, in the interim, in 2021, until those professionals do get skilled up and do get used to being in a new profession or in a profession where the expectation of higher service levels are there. It will take a little bit of time, and we do ask consumers to be patient. As Australians, take roles that had been filled previously by working holidaymakers and visa holders.
Mm. Wes, we've seen you so much in the media this year. It's, there've been so many stories about restaurants and the hospitality industry, and you're always in them. But I'd love to learn a little bit more about you and what made you want to step into such a role. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Oh, well, I don't know if we have long enough on the podcast. However, I've always been in and around hospitality. I faked an ID at 14 to work flipping hamburgers and waited tables through high school, and did a little time in the military, where I learned a bit of discipline and organization and triage, and then back and I studied business and focused on the back end of hospitality, more the financial side. And then got into venues and nightclubs and then pubs, and then moved to Australia and became a restaurateur of a decent-sized group that I grew into a public company and sold on, and have done some retail and in all of that, I got my CPA and chartered secretary. And so when I came back to Australia in 2019, April, I don't know how I fell right in line with the search for a CEO for restaurant and catering, but I think all the stars aligned, because literally within months of me taking the position, the country was in peril in terms of hospitality, and it has remained so. And I think the mix of my hospitality, financial, hospitality operations, military, and work ethic have certainly played their part in being able to help the industry. And I'm not camera shy. I'm not, I'm never afraid to be the voice of the industry. And I think that's helped the industry by having someone who's willing to stand up and fight for the industry and what they believe in.
Well, it's interesting that you say you represent the industry, because the industry is so disparate and so diverse. And most restaurants, of course, are not Restaurant Catering Industry Association members. How do you who do you see yourself as representing? Is it just those people that have paid up their dues, or is it the industry more broadly? I mean, do you have a vision of where you'd like the hospitality industry to be, and you're fighting for that? Like, there must be so many challenges in representing an arena that is so disparate, so diverse.
Yeah, well said. It certainly is a challenge, one that restaurant and catering myself are up for. Pre-COVID, there were about 47,000 restaurants, cafes, caterers, event caterers, and small bars in Australia as a segment of the wider accommodation food service industry, which pre-COVID was about 95,000 businesses. The way that the system is set up in Australia is the government typically only wants to speak to the peak bodies, to the industry association. And so, member or not a member, we do speak on behalf of the restaurant industry. And each subsegment of the sector is different. What big independent restaurants need is different than what restaurant chains need. What cafes and coffee shops need is different than what event caterers need. And we've had to get up to speed on all of those diverse and disparate voices. And I'm on my phone at least 3 or 4 hours a day to restaurateurs to find out exactly what they need, so that I can shape that into an ask from local, state, and federal government that is average across the whole industry and gets the best outcome for the entire segment, rather than just any individual operator.
Yeah, well, that must have been incredibly challenging over the past 6 or 8 months, because, of course, some people have your ear and they don't mind bending it, and others perhaps, are just really in the thick of their own business and perhaps, don't feel that your industry association does represent them, or really, they might not even know about you. And I'm thinking about, people, the vast number of people whose, English isn't their first language. They're in perhaps in the suburbs, they're not really connected with, quote unquote, the industry. Whereas there are those, bigger players, people that don't mind putting their views forward very strongly. I mean, it must be it must be very challenging at any time to balance that out and to think about, the good of the industry, but it must have been particularly challenging through the pandemic.
Oh, absolutely. You're right. There are many different backgrounds and diversity in the hospitality industry, and certainly as a base business, all restaurants have a premise, which means they needed a liquor license or a DA. Which things that we help with from the beginning, leases and that type of starting your business, as well as checklists to get your business started. What do I need to do? What are the 100 things that I need to do to open a restaurant? What certifications do I have to have? Food handler, food safety, all of that. We offer that type of training as an RTO, and then as they move into hiring staff, Restaurant and Catering argues the Restaurant Award. So almost every change to the Restaurant Award, Restaurant and Catering has a hand in that, and we argue for the industry, which is probably the single most important thing that we do for the industry is acting as the registered organization. So all 47,000 of those businesses, whether they're members or not, have a voice through Restaurant and Catering about their award, which is why we encourage as many restaurants as possible to join so that they can have a united voice in terms of speaking about the award, and certainly can't complain later if they didn't feel like they had a part, because we are the industry association that argues the award. And then you move on things like supplier discounts and negotiating with entire industries on terms and conditions, and the gambit of things that a restaurateur is going to face, from the cost of their electricity to any other supply chain. We're right there for them in the thick of it. Either arguing for the cost or we're arguing for the conditions that that business faces. And then we have our awards each year. We held all of our awards this year except for in Victoria, which was under lockdown, which recognizes the preeminent businesses and chefs and apprentice chefs and lifetime achievers. And also this year we introduced some awards around some of the things that restaurateurs and chefs had done to give back to the industry. So we're quite a wide amount of services that we offer to the industry, but certainly from the government's point of view, if they want to find something out, or if they want to, or if any change is made from the government's point of view from industry, it comes from the industry associations.
So can you give us an example, like take us behind the scenes a little bit? What are those, what actually happens? We hear about round tables. I'm sure you're on the phone a lot. Like what's an example even of, something that you've lobbied for, who was in the room, how did those conversations go? What actually happens?
So nationally, it's more about things like industrial relations. That's a bigger thing. More locally, it's things like liquor license. In Victoria, it's the temporary outdoor liquor licenses. We're right there fighting for the process of making that happen, as well as things like the 1 per 2 and the timing of how that rolls out and the specifics of what you can and can't do, which is us having multiple meetings, typically multiple meetings a week, with the departments that are responsible for executing the laws that are made. So if the government makes a rule or a law, it's up to departments within the government to execute that and to come up with the FAQs. And so even when Treasury came up with JobKeeper, we were there in the room working on all of the terms and conditions and how that rolled out, and certainly speaking along with other associations on making changes, especially to JobKeeper 2.0, which was originally supposed to take into account your 30 June and 30 September revenue, and we had it changed to just 30 September because so many businesses had begun to recover to 30 June, only to plummet again when the second lockdowns came in. And so behind the scenes, the government and the departments and the Lord mayors of the bigger cities in Australia will bring us into the room to be a part of the discussion. And because we represent such a big industry, we certainly carry some weight in terms of the final outcome.
And have you noticed much difference between, let's say, the different states in Australia and how they brought you in? Whether which rooms you were in and which rooms you perhaps weren't invited to be in?
We were primarily on the East Coast. We were very, very active in New South Wales, in Queensland, in Victoria, and South Australia, and ACT, and a bit less so in Western Australia, Northern Territory, and Tasmania. Those states went very quickly on their path, and also were some of the first to open, so didn't necessarily have to deal with the unique restrictions and lockdowns and pushes to ease as the East Coast states did.
Okay, but I mean, I saw you quoted, I think it was an article in today's Age, that there was less consultation in Victoria.
Certainly in the beginning, there was less consultation on the original roadmap. The original roadmap was done very hastily, and most of the industry associations didn't necessarily feel that we had been consulted on the content. We were more consulted on getting it out to our respective industries rather than the content. And then over time, and up until the most recent announcements, we certainly were fighting for the industry and working closely with the departments on the FAQs. But certainly in Victoria, it has come about that that many days without community transmission. But other states did open their economies with tracking and tracing and QR codes, and continued to move forward, even though they had some clusters of community transmission. So, definitely Victoria was on a different path, and now the entire country has gone, a significant amount of time without any major community transmission, which is a great outcome for everyone.
Okay, so obviously, you've got to be a bit of a diplomat in your role. So is it mostly now are you basically always looking forward? It's like, okay, what next? What next? It's not like you're looking back and going, oh, those, why didn't we open?
Look, it's always 2020. Looking back, you can always see what worked and what didn't work. But there are many challenges ahead. We're just in COVID safe summer. We're just in COVID normal. It is quite important that we all remain vigilant and keep those lines of communication open, and that understanding open, that industry and government and departments all need to work together to get to those outcomes. And hopefully moving forward, we will stay that way, and we will continue along the lines of that close association that we came to in the end with most of the stakeholders.
One of the things, well, it's not my brain flash, but like we have to have really good contact collection, don't we? I feel like that's almost the most important thing that restaurants can do now, and yet so many are taking their eye off the ball with that. And there's not great contact collection in restaurants. Are you advising your members? Like, is that something that you're stressing to people, that it's such an important way that we can stay safe and stay open?
A part of our weekly EDMs, and certainly on our coronavirus hub on our website, it is our number one message, is track and trace. That is the fastest and best way to deal with clusters. As long as international flights continue to land in Australia, there will be people who have coronavirus in hotel quarantine, and there will always be a risk, look at South Australia, that someone in hotel quarantine will pass that on to someone else. It's a virus. It's a squiggle. Its sole purpose in the world is to get transmitted. And so it is very important for us all to be super vigilant. No one wants to get caught out and be the hospitality venue that was not checking the tick of all of the patrons as they come in. Now that we're at 1 per 2 and now we have more patrons inside, it is even more important that as you come into a restaurant, that a server or a manager or a team leader or anyone whose responsibility it is to check that you've checked that tick and you have signed in, this will be the way that we stay on top of coronavirus and we don't end up with a third wave in Victoria or a second or third wave in the other states around the country.
Absolutely agree. I find it really scary and upsetting if no one, like, I'll look for the QR code, I'll find it if it's there, but if someone's not like making me, like, really making it happen. I think it just makes me feel unsafe. So yeah, I hope that message really gets through. Wes, we've seen a lot over the last little while about proposed industrial relations changes with some legislations put to Parliament in the last week of sitting. I'd love to know your take on it. So there's a couple of things perhaps we could talk about. One is that part-time workers can be asked to work more hours without penalty rates. And the other one is that the better off overall test when employers and employers are making agreements doesn't need to be applied. And I think that one is related to there's an expiry date on that one. But I mean, what do you think about this? I guess there's this balance between flexibility for businesses, but good pay and conditions for workers. Where do you land on it?
Well, luckily, the Better Off test doesn't apply so much to the hospitality industry. 93% of the industry is considered to be small, doing less than $38,500 a week in revenue. So certainly those single unit businesses don't necessarily have enterprise agreements. However, the flexibility that you talked about with the part-timers previous to this announcement in the omnibus bill was that if someone was rostered part-time, let's say for 22 hours or 23 hours, and if you had them work by agreement for any extra hours, they would have to be paid at overtime. So it didn't pass the pub test that an employee would be making overtime for less than 38 hours per week because of a line in the restaurant award that called for any hours over your part-time roster would be paid with that overtime. And so businesses were hesitant to give hours to part-time employees. Well, with these flexibilities, it then allows those part-time employees to get extra time and extra work, while the business is then able to be a bit more flexible around demand, which again, cautiously, we're not sure where that demand's going to fall in many states once the holidays are over. In addition, in the bill, allowing the JobKeeper flexibilities for the 12 most hit industries during the pandemic for the next 2 years will certainly allow those businesses to flex up and down in terms of labor during a time where we're still quite unsure how Australia is going to fare. Most countries, most jurisdictions, they're at the peak of coronavirus. They're reaching days that were unheard of even in April and May. I think in the United States yesterday there were nearly 3,000 deaths, and there were over 280,000 infections. If you look at the graph of Europe, if you look at the graph of many countries in Asia, it's as bad as it's ever been. So we're very lucky here in Australia. We're very lucky to have taken a strategy that got us nearly COVID-free as a country, and so it's quite important that all of the functioning processes within the government and processes within industrial relations are allowed to have that flexibility to flex as we go through 2021, and with the hopes of a viable vaccine that can be easily and quickly administered to the entire population. There certainly is still a lot of uncertainty, and so we support any flexibility in the omnibus bill.
What about the idea that casuals that have been employed in that role for 6 months have got the right to go to a full-time to a permanent role? What do you think about that for hospitality? Is that workable?
Look, the transition from casual to part or casual to full-time is certainly something that we're supportive of in terms of the communication between the employer and the employee and getting to stable employment. Ultimately, we're going to have quite a skill shortage for the next, according to the Treasury, potentially 1 to 2 years, even out to 2024, with net negative migration of 600,000 people. So, it is quite important that businesses are certainly getting people into those part and full-time jobs where they can, and that they have the flexibility to do so. And so, it's the trade-off between the casualization of the workforce in hospitality, which is traditionally where it's been, and then moving to something where there's enough flexibility in part-time that both the employer and the employee can live with that flexibility and it stabilizes the industry.
I mean, it feels like now it's an employee's market. I've heard of people getting, sign-on bonuses. People are able to ask for better wages and conditions. It's like nobody should be working in hospitality in a situation where they're being exploited or asked to work for less than the award at the moment. It feels like everybody is hiring. Nobody should stand for anything that's less than acceptable.
Absolutely. Restaurant and catering, and me personally, we stand for 100% compliance to the Fair Work Act and to the Restaurant Award or the Hospitality Award. And certainly through the pandemic, a lot of Black economy, shadow economy businesses that were dealing with just cash are certainly got no stimulus, got no government help. Those businesses will probably not be the ones that come back in the COVID-19 recovery. And certainly there will be less instances of exploitation. But just like you, we want to stamp out that exploitation. It is very important that hospitality's good name is lifted up, and that Australians again believe that it is a viable and vibrant industry, and it can be so fulfilling to employees, and it is a career. Around the world, hospitality is such a career. In fact, in the US, there's an Ivy League college of hospitality management. And many chefs and front of house managers and back of house managers will tell you that it is their lifetime career and they love it. It's very important that we move into an environment where that love is retained and grows within the Australian population that is here filling those roles.
I mean, speaking of the US, where you're from, and I'm sure you've got many, friends that you're talking to in the industry over there. I mean, it is so dire. It's so tragic. There's so little support for hospitality businesses. And just with the state of the virus over there, it's really devastating. I mean, there's no JobKeeper. And it's very fragmented. It's very politicized. There's a lot of court action and people fighting City Hall. It just seems like a complete mess. And yeah, really, really sad.
It is a complete mess. Comparing that, the flip side to Australia, Australia's done an amazing job. We are COVID-free, basically. There still are some cases every day, typically in hotel quarantine. There's very little, if any, community transmission. And so, overall, net, the governments all did what they thought best. And on the other side, here we are with a basically COVID-free Christmas and a COVID-free New Year's, hopefully, knock on wood. But I think that many other jurisdictions, they didn't have a collective voice. They did not have a leadership that came together so quickly. Look at National Cabinet came together very, very quickly early on in the COVID pandemic, and they came up with some ground rules. And for the most part, most of the premiers and the National Cabinet has stuck to those. There have been a few outliers, certainly, as you said, possibly for political reasons. But ultimately, the entire country was in lockstep. And ultimately, the citizens and the residents that are here followed the rules for the most part. And that really has led us to be the envy of the rest of the world because we did the right thing. We put health first and business a very, very close second. And that seems to be the way to stamp out coronavirus, to get business back to business more quickly.
Yeah, I saw some images the other day of all these plates that were put onto the lawn in Washington at Congress, and each one had the name of a failed restaurant written on it. And it was a really devastating image. We just got these scattered plates, representing broken dreams and people out of work. And I guess, that's a strong image, but it's not necessarily effective lobbying. So I guess, the US is so much bigger, of course. It's if the Australian industry is disparate, the US even more so. But it just feels like, there wasn't a collective voice. There wasn't concerted and collective action that helped so far has helped restaurants get through an extremely challenging year?
I think it's because the country is so big, the population is so big, and there are so many different types of hospitality businesses. I know that up popped the Independent Restaurant Association to lobby for the restaurant bill, which did get through Senate, but did not get through the House of Representatives. And so, that probably won't make it any further. However, there was a lot of lobbying. It was more that the health response was not the number one response, and so tracking and tracing went out the window. You could go from one town to the next, and some towns were masks and some were not. I come from the state of Georgia, and the Metro Atlanta was masks, and the state was not. And so you had so many competing voices and so many different opinions, and certainly that has been one of the contributing factors to the rampant outbreaks of COVID-19. And while the mortality is not high as a percentage, when the infection rate is so high and so many people get sick, the sheer numbers of people that pass away from COVID is increasing so dramatically. I think it's nearly 300,000 in the U.S. That's just under half of the cancer death number in the United States. That is a major number of people. Now, it is a low percentage of the infections. That is true, but it is a huge number because so many people were infected. Over 1 million people a week are catching COVID-19 in the U.S. And so, this is in Australia. Overall, the government has done an excellent job in working with both health and with industry. Not always in the speed that we wanted. Certainly, we lobbied, quite loudly for changes to happen more rapidly, based upon comparative changes in other states. And certainly, sometimes that worked, and sometimes that it didn't. But overall, as we march into a low COVID or COVID-free Christmas, and hopefully a COVID-free New Year's, one can look back at the total response from March until today, and ultimately things have gone in the direction of eliminating or certainly suppressing COVID in Australia.
We're so lucky. So, Wes, have you been just like so tired out by this year that you're going to just go off and tend the roses, or are you going to stick around in the role of restaurant and catering CEO for a bit longer?
Oh, I'm absolutely going to stay in the role of restaurant and catering. I love it. There are lots and lots of challenges left in the future. Certainly, as you said before, bringing the industry together, being the voice of the industry, moving into 2021, which will certainly be a fight in the IR arena, and then just the recovery of the industry and the prices, as you said, which will need to be maintained, as well as the pivot that the industry has taken to so many other different revenue channels and different ways of doing business. We're the ones that are going to be there for the industry to help them with the IR, to help them with the training and education, to help them with their leases and their forms, and with their business models, and to help them to deal with suppliers and help them to deal with their local, state, and federal governments going forward. And hopefully in 2021, helping them with their recruiting also. And certainly being seen as the single source of truth for the hospitality industry, and to be member focused. And to be that voice that they so desperately have needed for a long time, and that we have risen to the challenge to become.
So let's just finish off with a couple of, pointers for restaurants in Australia. What do you think that people are generally doing really well, and what do you think that restaurants could generally improve on?
Oh, well, restaurants in 2020 have had to up their game, and all of the restaurants that remain open post-COVID will be the ones that pivoted their business. that looked at their business models and streamlined them, that leaned down their menus. We recently released our 2020 benchmarking report this week, and it showed that food cost as a percentage of revenue had gone down significantly, and that's due to menus leaning out to the higher margin, low cost items. And certainly we'll see that maintained into the future to ensure the profitability of restaurants, which they need to stay open and to reinvest in their businesses for the long haul. Certainly businesses that have helped their employees, both visa and non-visa employees, by the non-visa employees signing up for JobKeeper and borrowing money if they needed to pay it, and keeping their businesses running and stable even if they were closed and only doing takeaway and delivery. And then most especially those businesses that went that extra mile and helped their visa workers and their international students who had no stimulus. They certainly have a special place in my heart and Restaurant and Catering's heart, because they went above and beyond. And if they could, and certainly not dinging anyone that couldn't do it for financial reasons, but all of the restaurants that could do it and chose to do it, they definitely will come out the other end with that staff and a bit better placed for 2021. Businesses that pivoted and added different revenue streams, even things that they may have hated before or thought wouldn't work for their particular food type. Look at Providore and the fine dining delivery, or look at some of the self-delivery apps that have popped up like Bopple. They certainly have changed the game, as well as some bespoke experiences where fine dining and premium casual chefs had their food take away and then made videos on YouTube and Facebook to show their diners how to unpack it and to present it as if it was the fine dining or premium casual. We're certainly seeing that businesses that have diversified their dining spaces, especially the ones that have changed a bit of their front of house, and maybe made their back of house a bit bigger so that they could do more production of takeaway and delivery, production of the bespoke experiences like the hampers, and even the packaged food. That has become a revenue stream for many businesses in the hospitality industry, where they're actually now selling to grocery stores and selling directly to consumers prepackaged meals for them to consume at home. And finally, businesses that stuck to it, businesses that put their shoulders to the grindstone and pushed through COVID-19, those are the businesses that are set for 2021 and have the most firm footing.
Well, we'll be there eating out and seeing, I guess, enjoying the fruits of that creativity and that dogged persistence. Thank you so much, Wes. It's really great to have you on the show. And I know it's been a massive year for you. I hope that you get to have a little break, perhaps eat in some restaurants around the country. But I wish you all the best for 2021.
Thank you, Dani. I'm certainly going to take a break. I just bought a ukulele today that I'm going to learn how to play over the break. And as of now, I'm going to Byron Bay to just relax.
Awesome. Well, next time when we have you back on the show, I expect a tune. So get practicing.
Okay, Dani.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.